Well, here it is, guys, the Blade Micro AH64 Apache. I've been waiting to do this review for a little while because I wanted to really fly this helicopter a bunch, get a good feel for how it flies before I came back and talked about it. I didn't want to fly it just once or twice and give you my thoughts because let's face it, we see tons and tons of quadcopters these days, micro quads, nano quads, but we don't get a lot of scale helicopters, so it's special when we get one. In the hobby shop, you know, the shelf is full of micro quads, the nano quads, and clinging to the edge of the shelf are the helicopters. So these are kind of an endangered species, I think, sometimes. And, you know, quads are popular. That's just the way it is. That's fine. But when we get a scale helicopter, I want to take my time. I want to fly it, get to know it, and then let you guys know what I think. Comes in at 210 bucks bind and fly, including the battery, which is a 2-cell 400 milliamp pack, and charger. And you can get it ready to fly for 250 bucks, which includes the transmitter. This is a collective pitch heli, has both AS3X and SAFE, and so you have the panic recovery feature. Brushless main and brushless tail motors, and lots of scale features on this one, guys. One thing I like to do when I get a scale helicopter or airplane is learn about the full scale. So I'm going to talk about the model and also the full scale because there are some interesting features about this helicopter. It is a scale heli, guys, so I'm going to tell you right up front, I did not fly this thing full collective and try and do flips and rolls and things like that. I'm doing that with the Nano CPS and also the Blade 130, but I don't want to crash this thing and wreck it. To me, a scale helicopter is all about scale flight, enjoying the look of the helicopter in the air, and just having fun with it like that. I'll save the 3D stuff for other helicopters. There is ability of this helicopter to fly 3D, but it is not overpowered. So if you do fly it 3D, you better know what you're doing beforehand. You better have some experience with it because this helicopter, if you put it into the ground, it's going to be kind of a mess and you're going to be having a lot of work to do to fix it. In fact, in the box, they give you a lot of zip ties because I think they're almost saying, well, you're probably going to crash it and break it, so here's some zip ties in case you want to fix it. So keep that in mind if you decide to put this helicopter inverted or fly it aggressively. Generally, it does take off pretty quickly. I don't like to hover it too close to the ground. I like to get it out of the ground effect and get it up in the air. I have the timer set on the radio at 4 minutes and pretty much land once I hit that 4-minute mark. Alright guys, just in general about the Apache AH64, it is a flying tank. It is an aggressive, mean machine, and this thing is well armored and extremely well armed. This is not something you want to go up against. And you know, you just look at the helicopter, you can see that the profile in any direction is so narrow, very hard target to hit. This thing is just made to fly in and destroy stuff, and that's what it's good at. And this model has tons of scale detail. I mean, this is almost pretty much a plastic scale model on an RC helicopter. That's about how good this is, and very impressive. All right, guys, we're going to just start at the tail, and the first thing you notice is this funny angle to the tail rotors. And this is just like the full scale. They have this sort of strange looking angle that you don't really see too often. And I've read a few things about that. One thing is that when they designed the tail motor, they wanted it to be quiet. They didn't want it to be loud because remember, this is an attack helicopter. It's very slim, it's got a very narrow profile, and it's designed to engage in fighting. So quiet is better. 4 blades, quieter than 2 blades. And in somewhere along the development, they found that angling these blades made it even quieter. So that's one thing I've read. The other is that transporting the helicopter, remember it's transported on airplanes into areas where it's going to be engaged. Transporting it, it's easier to transport when it has these blades at an angle rather than at 90 degrees. And finally, I've read also the mechanics of the tail just kind of necessitated that they angle it this way. But if you know any other reasons why it has this funny tail angle, let me know. It doesn't really make any difference as far as I can tell with the model, but it's kind of a cool little scale feature that they added to it. Main rotor, guys, we have, of course, flybarless, 4-rotor, very cool looking, and the rotors spin counterclockwise, just like on the full scale. Now, we don't have titanium tips on the rotors like the full scale because, yeah, it's just a model, let's face it. But the full scale does have titanium tips, very powerful, very strong blades. Up front, guys, we have the sensor array for both the pilot and the gunner, and that's a nice little scale touch right there. And just like the full scale, if you want to put the helicopter back in the box, just like you put the full scale into an airplane for transport, you have to take the main rotor blades off. As it comes in the box, these have to be put on. They're in a separate little bag with the hardware. So just that's one little thing you have to do to get it ready to fly, but that's about a 5-minute piece of work. Well, we know the full-scale helicopter, guys, is powered by 2 engines. Of course, this one is powered by a brushless motor sitting up there. But these 2 engines here, and they put some nice detail with them, and they have a system to reduce the heat signature of these engines, to reduce the heat of the exhaust on the full scale so the helicopter is less detectable. And then we have, of course, the armament, and this thing is armed to the teeth. If you were going against this with an AK-47 or a rocket-propelled grenade or something like that, you better have your affairs in order, because this thing is going to take you out. This is just a mean, well-armored machine. And so on the outside there, we have the rocket launcher pod, and then we have the Hellfire missile rack next to it. Underneath, we have a 30mm cannon, and you can tilt that up and down a little bit. So just a well-armed, very, very vicious machine designed to go in and basically just destroy whatever it needs to destroy. These landing gear are attached to the fuselage on the inside, so these are not easy to replace. If you have a hard landing and you break a landing gear, you're looking at replacing the entire fuselage or just gluing it back together. So you're not going to be able to just replace a landing gear. So just keep that in mind. You want your landings to be fairly soft, and these don't have any give to them. This is just rigid plastic, so if you come down pretty hard, there's a good chance that you're going to break a landing gear. There's our LED light, guys, and they just flash like that. I think that's a cool little feature. Not quite enough to fly at night, but nice scale touch. Alright guys, so here is the stock battery. This is a 2-cell 7.4 volt 400 milliamp pack, 30C. Measurements 40 millimeters by 25 millimeters by 13 millimeters. And I give you that because if you have a battery pack that's bigger than that, even by a millimeter or two in any of those dimensions, it's probably not going to fit in here. The fit in this battery compartment is extremely tight. And in fact, when I first tried to get this battery in the shop, it probably took me 5 or 10 minutes to figure it out because it is a really tight fit. Now, as I've flown the helicopter and cycled batteries in and out of that battery compartment, it's gotten easier, partly because I know how to put the battery in now, and partly because it's probably opened up a little bit, it's probably loosened a little bit in the process. So this is a tight fit. Have some patience with it. I'll show you how I put the battery in, but it is one issue that people are noticing. Balance plug here goes under the motor. Now you don't want your wires to touch the motor because it gets very hot, but you want to just slide that balance plug underneath there, and then the battery's just going to lay down flat. And that's easier to do now than when I first got the helicopter because I think things are just a little bit looser there. So we'll go ahead and connect it. And now you want to get these wires kind of tucked towards the front. So I usually just kind of pinch them and kind of push them down and towards the front of the compartment there, because you don't want them on the sides and you don't want them near the motor. So once they're down like that, take your canopy, put it back on, and this has gotten easier over time. And there it goes, pretty much flush right there. If this is raised up, your canopy may come up when you fly it. That happened the first time I flew it because it wasn't quite down tight enough. So there it is. It's pretty easy to get the battery in and out now, but you know, first when I did it, it was definitely difficult. All right guys, I'm going to take the battery out now. I mean, you can see that this has just got barely enough room to be in there, and if you try a battery that's a millimeter or two bigger, it's just not going to fit. The bind plug connector for the model is actually right here in the front of the fuselage, so you put your bind plug in there when you're going to bind it, then make sure you take your bind plug out. Just tuck it back into the side so you have enough room to get your battery in there. Guys, you have 3 modes: basic, intermediate, and advanced. Basic mode uses AS3X, and pretty much it flies almost like a stabilized quadcopter in that mode. It's self-leveling, it's very easy to fly. If you're just getting used to tail-in hovering, suddenly you'll find that nose-in hovering with AS3X in beginner mode is very easy. It's just very stable, flies really well. Now it has dual rates, you have high rates and low rates. I found that the beginner AS3X mode on low rates is almost not responsive enough. And if you're used to flying helicopters, you're probably going to find that that mode is a little sluggish and a little slow. Okay for indoors, but if you're outside and there's any sort of wind blowing, you may not have enough control to fight the wind. My favorite mode, guys, on this one really is beginner mode with AS3X and high rates. You can fly the helicopter pretty aggressively that way. You can fight the wind, you've got self-leveling, you don't have to worry about crashing it so much, and just enjoy the helicopter, the way it looks, the way it sounds. Lots of fun to fly it. If you want to do 3D, just know what you're doing, just be prepared for it. It doesn't have huge amounts of punch-out power, so it's not going to perform like, you know, a 130X or a helicopter that's designed for 3D flight. It's going to be a little more slow, a little more sluggish. There's no doubt that you can loop this, you can roll it, you can fly it and invert it and all that, but just know what you're doing if you're going to fly that way, because if you crash this helicopter, it's going to be a fair amount of work to fix it, and you'll probably be using those zip ties that they gave you in the box. Alright guys, there is the Blade Micro AH-64 Apache. Great scale helicopter, really a lot of fun. I love just watching it fly in the air, watch it hover, and they did a really nice job on this. Basically a flying plastic scale model. My only complaints, the landing gear being part of the fuselage, so if you break that, you're gluing it or replacing the fuselage, and then the tight fit of the battery compartment. But at least with the battery compartment, I found that after running a bunch of packs through it, it did sort of loosen up a little. It's easier now to get the battery in and out and get the canopy on, so it's not as much of a problem as it was before. But again, if you have battery packs that are a little larger than the stock pack, they're probably not going to fit, so just keep that in mind. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. I'll try to answer. And as always, if you can leave a thumbs up or subscribe, I always appreciate that. And I'll see you flying next time.
Dude.